We are, as the first thing at the session this morning, we'll be passing on some elements about the benefits of sustainable buildings. And the first thing we brought along is some background on our work with sustainable living in buildings, and a few words about the Active House Alliance, and the experiments that we have performed in the demonstration program that we call Model Home 2020, which are the 6 buildings you see to your right. And below are the families currently living in 4 of the houses. They are right now testing the projects in real life, so it's real people in real homes. And then the backbone of the presentation is the facts and the documentation, trying to take a closer look into what the questions revealed, the quiz questions revealed. And we have brought along some documentation, which, first of all, we have learned through our buildings with these demonstration buildings, but also some of the work which we work together with you in EuroACE, and then from the Active House Alliance. We have a commitment to sustainable living in buildings. It's mainly about people and planet in Velux. We engage with key stakeholders, and we deliver products and solutions which are made to optimize human health and well-being, and at the same time minimize environmental impact. We took a point of departure a while back, actually as long back as in 2005, when we started working professionally with sustainable buildings. We looked at some interesting figures, namely that we spend 90% of our time inside buildings that represent 40% of the energy consumption, and 30%, according to actually quite old but probably still valid WHO investigation on how buildings promote, or rather the opposite, our personal health and well-being. And we thought, well, why don't we try to tackle the 90, 40, 30 in one solution? And how do you do that? We looked into how we can build a new model. I don't know if you know Buckminster Fuller, who is a famous inventor, engineer from the US. And what we chose, according to his philosophy of innovation, was the progressive strategy. Not the confrontative, arguing against the existing paradigms, not the defensive, but rather the progressive one, where you say, well, how can we make a new model which makes the existing model with the problems intrinsical in this model obsolete? And we, back then, formalized and were one of the founding partners in the Active House Alliance. There's some more information in your folders in front of you. I just wanted to show very quickly the radar, because it's important as to understand how do you perceive and understand, indicate and quantify a sustainable building. We have been looking and working together with the other partners in the Alliance on how can we do this, express sustainability in a building, so that we, all of us, including laymen as well as professionals, how can we talk about how sustainable a building is? There is a slight tendency, my own profession including, that sustainable buildings are to be named slightly as rocket science. For a whole lot of good reasons, one of them being that it is sometimes very close to rocket science, but it doesn't change the fact that if we are going to address the challenges mentioned before, we are going to have a language and a terminology and an expression of the sustainability of which we can all actually recognize and pick it up and see it at once at a glance. This is the holistic approach to an active house, where you have the comfort, the energy and the environment parameters. And you can dive in, and if any of you are looking for where can I get the decimals in the calculations, they're all in here, but they are in layers behind it, for instance, expressing the indoor climate or the energy. There is the set of specifications which is available online. It just came out here in April, and it has also a calculation model. So you can actually go in and you can test, maybe you have your own house or your flat. You can go in and you can say, how is my house sustainable? So you can do a sort of a self-verification and assessment. Then what we did ourselves was we performed experiments back in our company founder, Mr. Willem Kan Rasmussen. He said back in 1956 that one experiment is better than 1,000 expert assumptions. And having a lot of experts in sustainable building, we took out 6 experiments in 5 European countries. They all relate to the 2020 regulations and were set out in 2007, 2008, built in 9 to 11, built on the active house principles, of course, and all the projects are monitored in use to see which experiences do we get from this in order to qualify back again into theory. What we can say, if you want to know, so did it work, we can actually already say now that we are able to fulfill the 2020 regulations with the knowledge and the products that we have today. And all the houses are built, actually the last one being completed in 2011. We, for our part, can say that we have already launched a new product generation, as have a lot of other manufacturers, and we have gained a lot more knowledge. So actually, already based on the knowledge base we had back then, we are able to fulfill the 2020 regulations. The houses look like this. It's in 5 countries, and 4 of them being new builds, 1 family homes, the one in Denmark, Austria, France, and UK, which is a double house, or semi-detached, is the popular term for that. Office building in Copenhagen, made for COP15. The Green Lighthouse, I think it will be the most visited 1,000 square meters in Denmark. We have had very many VIP visitors in there, and actually as many as 15,000 visitors have come past in the first 3 years. And we have just reported the house, also online. You can find a nice report of 40 pages saying, so how did it go in the first 3 years? And this house in particular I'd like to take out because this is a climate renovation. And it's the only renovation amongst the 6 for some other reasons, but definitely one that from which we can learn a lot. It's a 1954 house. I'll come back to how it looked and how it was developed. And it's part of the International Building Exhibition, which is this year in Hamburg. I can only recommend to go there. It's very interesting in total to see the building exhibition. What is it that we bring to the houses? We, as a company, with our products and solutions, we mainly focus on the whole year approach. A house is not made only to not freeze in the winter, as we are not either, to just have one winter coat and then use that for the rest of the year. It's important that the house is able to adapt to the change of the seasons and different climates. So it's important to look at the cold season as well as into the hot season. Natural ventilation as a primary source are used in all the houses. The house in Hamburg has only natural ventilation as the only one. Then we focus on high daylight quality, which is determined by daylight factor, not by percentage of glazing. That is rather quantity. We believe that it should be a qualitative approach. User control, that you are able to, as a user, to influence your immediate and direct indoor climate surroundings is very important. And that's a sense of security as well. And then, last but not least, that it's energy efficiency by design, meaning not by technology, but firstly by design. So you design the house according to the conditions and the plot and what you have right in front of you, and then you try to take as much benefit and use of that. And we believe strongly in the energy balance, the solar gain minus the heat loss, and looking at the energy balance as such. Then for the quiz and the qualification of the quiz, and I promise you that the correct answers are hidden in here. First of all, the jobs that are created as an output of energy efficiency. This is actually a EuroACE investigation, so Adrian can definitely link further to that. That there is an average of 19 jobs created per €1,000,000 invested in energy efficiency. And that could actually amount to as much as £200, 200 billion euro. The way it's built up is the documentation and reference on the content is here. So you can go in and have a further look into these facts and benefits. Something like payback time is very interesting when you speak about benefits of sustainable buildings. Just usually it is talking about the renewable energy technology. But you could also take the approach as has a Danish researcher, Bjarne Olesen, in a study where he has looked at the efficiency of the people in the buildings. And he has determined that up to 5 to 10% increase of productivity if you improve the indoor climate. And that means that you can have a payback time of only 4 months, according to what the measures you take to your building. It's documented in this study, and then I would like to introduce the Sustainable Sector Guide to Buildings, which refers to this study, where, I don't know if you can follow, but you surely can on your screens. There is, in proportions, first of all, the investment you make in construction. That's the one house here on the bottom. Then you have 5 times, you have the, so to say, operating costs, where you're talking about what you have to invest, also in terms of energy, to keep the building going. And then, if you look at the value of what happens inside the building. This is one study taking out this particular measures, but I think you will recognize and acknowledge the proportions. It's about getting the proportions right. We can talk a lot about how much we pay in order to get a building constructed or maybe renovated. And then we can talk a lot about the energy we need for keeping it running. And possibly also speak about all the energy, not just parts of it. But actually, if we focus on the health and the well-being of the people inside the buildings, that then we are talking about a completely different scale. Then what about the costs? What are the additional costs? And as you were giving very, very different answers, this confirms as well that the impression, how much do people think it costs? 17% as an average more to build sustainably or building green. It is actually, it can be calculated as low as 1.5. Of course, depending on which parts you include and when you calculate it. But you can go down as far as 1.5%. What we have seen in our houses, all the houses I showed you before, we have had calculated or recalculated. Because we have built prototypes, and it's no secret that prototypes are not cheap to build for the first time. But we have had house builders estimate and evaluate what would it cost to build them again. So they see the house, and we have asked them, what would you take for a customer to build exactly this house one more time? And we get average prices. As soon as somebody has done something in the building business, everybody would like to do the same again, and it very quickly becomes market neutral. But cost savings, it's not a matter only of looking at the energy. Here is an example again from the Sector Guide to Sustainable Buildings, and you will recognize from before, I hope, the picture of our demonstration building in Hamburg. This is how it looked like, the top one when we bought it. It's a 1954 settler's house, and it's a double house, so we bought half of the house. And then the planning describes different modules, because you may not have the money to go all the way. So it's important that people have a sort of availability and scalability of the measures they want to take. This is the extended retrofit of 148 square meters with a lot of energy measures added. And this is then, so to say, the full Monty, the premium retrofit, which is 189, where then the photovoltaic cells are also added. And a German expert in life cycle costing, Wolfram Trinius, who's also here, who was the winner but just before, surprisingly. he's the guy with the cookies, so it's good to know for later on. Has made this life cycle costing, reviewing it over 50 years. The original house is the blue line. The medium is the extended, and the premium is the orange one, and they follow each other actually very much parallel. The top one is if you calculate that you have a 2% energy price escalation, and here you will see, well, it didn't actually pay off to make the investment in the energy measures. With a 5% energy price escalation, it does. There is a breaking point. There's a tipping point over, 27 years, I think, Wolfram? And then the question is, how far ahead is your horizon? Why is it that you are doing these things? This is to say that energy efficiency is not the only motivation factor. There will be several. It's one amongst the benefits, but it's possibly also a speculative one. What we recommend is to look at costs in a life cycle perspective. If you take the whole perspective, the top one graph here is coming out of a tool, an LCC tool, which Wolfram Trinius has been developing, and we would like to try and see if we can make it easy to use for somebody on a planning basis to calculate life cycle costing. And we're planning to see if it will fit into the alliance and the radar calculation. And this is looking at only the operating cost where you get one grade, and the bottom one shows if you have all your investment. The investment in the climate envelope, what is it you're doing? Maybe all the quality that you invest here. And then you get the operating costs on top, and then they get a lot paler actually, and you can hardly recognize them. So it's quite important to see these two things in connection, and maybe you pay something expensively at the beginning, but it could turn out to be affordable seeing it on long term. The health benefits, multiple, well, it's a study which says that £1 invested in energy efficient renovations can reduce public finances with 42 pence. Thanks. I think my time is getting close to, running out. So I'll just take the last two slides, which is the top reason for building sustainably. Comes out of investigation amongst a number of companies in the US. And the interesting part of this one, besides that it answers one of the questions we had before, is the difference from 2008, which is the red bars, to 2012. How has the attitude actually changed? How do people look upon and evaluate the importance of personal health and well-being? And there is a huge rise in that respect. Relatively, it's almost an 88% rise. So it's something which is very important for a whole lot of reasons, also obviously for the productivity, but also as something which you could look upon as an important valuation parameter in sustainable buildings. The last slide is a very new investigation which is come out in Danish in the autumn, and we have brought it out in English as a summary in our magazine. Daylight and Architecture, there's a reference here. And just briefly describing it, it is a large study. It's a PhD study which has taken out research to investigate the most densely built area in Copenhagen. How could daylight be used as a first tool for energy renovation? Which difference would daylight make if you look at that as one tool, and then there are also a number of other tools, but taking out daylight as the one through-going parameter or tool. And here is shown how much would it cost to do, these are different things from one-layer glazing to two-layer glazing to a French balcony, to a different window design. And if you want to look further into the examples, I suggest you look into the study itself. But this is the costs. How much do you have to pay? How much would you save on energy is the middle one. Or this is your energy consumption, and you can see where it gets lower. And there are some differences, but they are not really that big. And then the daylight factor, again, the qualitative expression of daylight. And then you can correlate these measures and see how much would I have to pay, what would be the savings, and what would be the quality of the improved daylight factor, which is actually one of the key aspects in our health and well-being. We can see this from our families, and there's a reference to that in a film that we have produced for today, and which you can see in, I think it's the coffee break, where some of the families which are living in our houses, they can very specifically feel the difference after having what we call substantial or sufficient daylight conditions. So it confirms this investigation. The conclusions, summing up, rounding off, I won't karaoke through this, but leave you with the presentation, which you will also get after today. But just saying that there are a number of benefits, which is one of them being energy efficiency, but productivity, health and well-being improvement on a personal basis is actually probably one of the key things to look at, and where we may not know as much as we would actually, if we deepen our knowledge on this aspect, we would be able to use these tools to a much higher extent than we do today. And then the life cycle performance. We recommend that you have a focus on the whole life cycle performance, and not just what does it cost for 1 kilowatt hours for 1 square meter for 1 year, but look at the total aspects.